Ben asked me to come down here. I didn't realize he asked me to speak until I checked the website and saw that I was listed among the speakers. And so I called or emailed Ben and said, what the hell do you want me to talk about, Ben? I'm not a chef, I'm not a gardener. And he said, Chris, just talk about something really deeply personal that you never talk about with anybody. And I was like, thanks, Ben. Thanks for that cool advice. I grew up in like a rich community in sunny Southern California where my parents loved me and nothing ever went wrong. So I didn't grow up on like a hard scrabble rural New Zealand farm like some people. But if I have to say something personal, I guess it would be I'm a food writer, but I'm not a great one. I don't know that I'll ever be a great food writer. The people I admire as food writers have experience and taste, and they've put a lot of effort into their craft, and they bring gravity and integrity to what they do. And I've only been doing this for a little while. I was a cook in college. I realized after some time that I would never be a chef. I didn't have the commitment or the vision or the hand-eye coordination to do it. And so I stopped cooking. And then, I also thought at one time that I would be a great novelist. But again, I grew up in a fancy house and I had nothing to say. So instead of writing books, I started editing them instead. And I never really thought to combine these two things, as writing and editing with cooking. I love cookbooks and I love food magazines, but I felt like it was a little frivolous to talk about cooking in that way. And then I met David Chang and his cookbook co-writer, Peter Meehan, in 2009. And here were two guys who were a chef and they were a food writer, and they were not frivolous in any way. They were serious people, and they did serious work, and they were passionate about it. And we felt we cared about the same things. And they had these ideas that they wanted to share, and they needed people to help them share these ideas. So we started a magazine called lky.ph, which Miffy was so nice to say good things about, but actually sucks. And I started working on this magazine. I felt like, I was doing important work now. I felt people were telling me so. People like Miffy were saying that this was an important document, and we were helping to save the printed word. And I started getting flown around the world to things like this. And a few years ago, at a event that I was flown to because I make this magazine, I met Ben Shewry in Poland. It was an event organized by Andrea Petrini, who you'll hear from today. And he had invited a dozen or so chefs, including Ben and Daniel Patterson and Iñaki, who you'll also hear from today, to come to rural Poland and learn this bizarre cuisine that nobody knew anything about, and then at the end cook a dinner for local dignitaries and bureaucrats and journalists. And so I asked Ben, what are you going to cook for this dinner for these guys? What are you going to bring from your homeland? And he said he was going to make a hungy. And I said, what the hell is a hungy? And he said, well, why don't you help me make it and you'll find out. Not having anything better to do, I agreed to do this. 2 days later of digging a hole in the ground with plastic shovels and finding firewood and gathering stones, I was convinced that he was making me dig my own grave, into which he'd push me and bury me. At one point, he had me fill the hole with stones and then take them out. And I was just like, I didn't understand what kind of sick person he was. But eventually we filled the hole with other things, with pigs and vegetables, and we buried it under the earth and then dug it up 12 hours later to the delight of audience and diners, and it was great. And then after the meal, this Polish chef was going around asking all the other chefs to sign his menu as a keepsake. And he came up to me with a pen, and I kind of waved him off and said, no, I can't do that. I'm not a chef. But he looked at me with these insistent eyes, and I started looking around the room for some way to get out of there. And my gaze caught Daniel Patterson, and he smiled and he said, he wants you to sign the menu, chef. How can you say no? So I sort of sheepishly signed this thing and gave it back to him, and then went and hid in a corner of the room. And I guess there's something to be said for this, and I should take some pride in being considered one of the guys, one of the chefs. These guys, they look at our magazine and they see something urgent in it. They believe that we've come from the same place. But instead of that, I felt the opposite. Things like this remind me that I'm not a cook. I couldn't have been a chef because I wasn't a good enough cook. I wasn't a novelist because I wasn't a good enough writer. And now I edit this magazine, and somehow I'd fallen back to being not the guy who makes the things, but the guy who talks about the other guys who make the things. And you know, today I'm on this roster of people speaking, and they spend their days with their hands in the dirt and in blood and whatever other unseemly liquids it takes to put food on our table. And I spend my days with my hands on a keyboard. It's fine. It's not a big deal. I still put out a good magazine, and I get invited to things like this. But I feel like I still wanted to do something more significant. And I think that's why these guys are here today, too. There's no reason for Roy and for Iñaki and Daniel and Ben and his whole crew at Attica to take time out of their lives and out of their work to do this, except that they want to help young cooks, and tomorrow they'll cook a lunch that will benefit people who are less privileged than them. And there's no reason for them to do that except that they want something more. So I started a nonprofit recently called Zero Foodprint. The idea being to address something, that 30% of the world's greenhouse emissions come from the food system. That's growing food, putting on the table, creates greenhouse gases and causes climate change. And so what we wanted to do, a couple years ago at a conference like this one, organized by Renee Redzepi, the chef at Noma in Copenhagen, we did a study in which we examined 3 meals: the tasting menu at Noma, a meal at a casual restaurant in Brooklyn, and then a home meal. And we wanted to assess how much worse it really was to eat at a restaurant than it was to eat at home, and if there was something that could be done to fix that. I'm going to precariously drink this water now. What we found was that it's not so bad. The restaurants aren't terrible for the environment, and more than that, not only can they improve, but with a little bit of effort, they could become leaders in environmental change and fighting climate change. And so we started this nonprofit because the idea of being a sustainable restaurant or environmentally conscious is such a complicated idea. There are so many things you can do and so many things that you can't do if you want to be, quote unquote, sustainable. We wanted to distill this down to one thing: what a restaurant can do to fight climate change. And through offsets and through education and best practices and a little bit of effort, restaurants could become 100% carbon neutral. And we started with a small group of restaurants, the first one being Noma. But it's my kind of crazy hope that if enough restaurants stop and say, we will no longer contribute to climate change, then eating at a restaurant can somehow become something that's good for the environment, which is totally zany. So, at the end of the day, I understand why Ben put this conference on. I understand why he wanted to say something, for me to say something personal. First, he's an emotional dude. And secondly, I think like me, he has this sort of dissatisfaction. He's never happy with what he's doing. He feels like he can contribute in a greater way to all of our well-being. And what dawns on me, after having lived with the same sickness for a long time, is that more than writing or editing or cooking, the thing that I'm probably best at is being really unhappy with what I do. So I sped right through this whole talk, and I think that my takeaway or my message to you is that if we're all a little bit more unhappy with what we do, then we can make the world in general a little happier. Thank you.